Hi everyone, hope you're well. So welcome to another music related musings on, and it's another one where we're going to look at album releases from a certain year. The last set of album related musings on I did covered the 90s, and that's now been exhausted. So now we go to 1980. And I've decided to take a step back in time to 1980 because that really is the first, I suppose, full decade where I was buying music for myself. And buying it in real time in terms of, when I bought albums, they tended to be when they came out. And the proportion of newer albums that I was buying and listening to in terms of them just coming out was a lot higher in relation to the stuff I was buying retrospectively. I wasn't buying quite the same volume of stuff that I was maybe buying later just because of disposable income issues, but certainly the proportion between new stuff versus old, the new stuff proportion was a lot higher, I think. So yeah, we're going to have a look at 1980, and then once I've got through that decade over subsequent episodes of Musings On, I will turn my attention to the 2000s. The other reason why I decided to leave the 2000s for the moment and do 1980 is because I really wanted to go back through the 2000s and listen to a lot of stuff I'd not listened to first time round, because the number of new releases in the 2000s that I would have liked to listen to but never got around to listening to is just astronomical. And I thought, well, if I'm going to do the 2000s alongside talking about stuff I listened to at the time, I did want to be a little bit well versed in the general musical zeitgeist and the stuff that I was missing. Whereas in the 80s, I'm a bit more familiar with the stuff that I missed. So as I always do, we'll talk about the stuff that I bought when it came out, and then we'll move on to the stuff that I either bought later or didn't buy at all. But first of all, we'll just take a quick look at the best-selling albums, and again through the lens of the UK. And bear in mind, some of these albums may well have been released the previous year, but Super Trooper came out that year quite late actually. Wow. 3rd of November 1980. Ready for Christmas. Peak position in 1980, number 1. Zenyatta Mondata by the Police, that was October 1980. There's various greatest hits albums, as I've pointed out before, going to be in these best-selling album lists, some years more than others. Regatta de Blanc was still selling well. It came out in 79. And I wonder if Alanis de Moore. So that was 78. So yeah, 1980 was a good year for the Police. They had Zenyatta Mondata come out, and both of their other albums released the previous 2 years were also still doing well in the charts. So yeah, Scary Monsters, Super Creeps, and we'll get onto these further into the video where I'll dig into them a bit more. Wasn't it The Wall that had come out fairly late in the year? Yeah, 30th of November 79, that was right. Yeah, so it didn't come out in 1980, so we won't necessarily talk about that. So anything on this list that came out in 1980, I'll probably end up talking about, but I just wanted you to get an overview of what the sort of popular zeitgeist was like, or the popularity zeitgeist for music was like in the UK in 1980, album-wise. So what albums did I buy at the time and still really, love to this day? She Agreed. So this was by a band called Girl. A lot of people might not be familiar with this band. People that are fans of Def Leppard may recognise Phil Collen, because he went on to join them during the recording of the Pyromania album. Phil Lewis ended up in LA Guns, and I'm not sure where the other members here ended up, but yeah, I bought this album when it came out, and there was a copy of Wasted Youth kicking around in the house at some point. Oh, the other point I'd like to make, and I'll flag them up as I go along. So when I'm saying albums that I bought that year, I suppose I should actually widen that a bit, because there's some albums here that I do own. They were bought that year, but not by me, because I think I might have mentioned in previous music video, album-based music videos, that myself and my two brothers came to a sort of musical agreement where we tried to obviously leverage our, birthday money, Christmas money, in a real constructive way. And so we sort of made arrangements what albums we would each personally buy. So we didn't double buy stuff, and it just made our money go a lot further. But this one was one that I did own. But I'll flag up the ones that were in the house I listened to at the time. So I listened to when they came out, but I didn't actually own them. They were owned by one of my other brothers. So, but all of these actually I did check, and I ultimately went on to buy. But yeah. Yeah, Just Testing was another one I bought when it came out, Wishbone Ash. I was a big Wishbone Ash fan at the time. I had a sort of early compilation of, I think, the first 2 or 3 albums on vinyl was the first album I bought by them. I bought this album when it came out, and I think I own this on both vinyl and cassette, actually. And then I ended up retrospectively buying, what was it? Was it There's the Rub, I think? One of their earlier albums. Let's have a quick look. No, not that one. New England, that's the one I bought. Yeah, New England. Compilation album, yeah, I'm not sure, it might be this one, but that will be 81, and I bought it before then, so yeah, not sure. I don't know who it's thrown together by either, so that's the thing. Yeah, it might be one of those sort of I'm trying to think who were the sort of classic compilation labels in the UK at that time, but yeah, maybe I've got the order wrong. Yeah, but I do know I bought this when it came out, because I can remember it being played on the radio on the Saturday afternoon rock show and the Friday rock show, and I really liked the track. Where's it gone? Helpless, Insomnia, Haunting Me, those 3 tracks. I mean, the whole album I think is great, but those 3, that first side actually is a really cool first side of an album, but yeah, these 3 tracks really work one after the other and sort of seg into one another, I think. It's interesting, it's actually a cover version then. Progressions of Power. So yeah, my middle brother owned this. I remember hearing it on the Friday rock show, playing him the track which I recorded. I think it was called I Live for the Weekend. And then yeah, he bought this. We played this a lot. And also Allied Forces and Never Surrender, which I did actually buy. So I think he owned the first 2. And we were always fascinated by the earlier stuff, but we could never really see it in the record stores in the UK. Wheels of Steel. So yeah, my youngest brother was a big Saxon fan. He bought this when it came out, and we listened to it a lot. I then bought it on cassette a little while after. And they had 2 albums out that year, actually. This was another band that my youngest brother was into. Judas Priest. We were both into. I went to see them in 81? Sometime around there, maybe 81, 82. I know when it was I first started work, so it might be like 81 into 82. I saw them at Crawley Leisure Centre. And I remember him having this. Did he have it on cassette? I know he had Killing Machine on cassette, because I remember him buying that, and I think that was the first Judas Priest album he bought, and then he bought British Steel and the live album as well. We used to listen to this a lot. Breaking the Law. We used to have this sort of Sunday afternoon listening thing where we'd sort of sit down together when we weren't fighting and listen to albums. It was pretty cool. So I remember listening to these. Heaven and Hell, yeah, I bought this when it came out. I'd heard the track, where is it? Neon Nights and Heaven and Hell on the Friday Rock Show, particularly Neon Nights, and so yeah, I bought this in April 1980. Yeah, at that point I was still at school, and I was getting the money to buy these. I was basically coming from birthday or Christmas money or whatever. Yeah, I can remember buying this on cassette actually, and playing it all through the summer as well. When I was off school. Yeah, so I worked during the summer, and so I'd play this a lot when I was out and about. Play the game Dragon Attack, No One Bites the Dust. Yeah. Oh, Save Me. Now didn't that come out in 80? Okay. Yeah. Earlier in the year. I had a feeling that, because I remember this coming out. We'll have to see. I'm going to do an episode on other random singles. I'll have to see what Queen singles I've got still. Metal Rendezvous. Yeah, I heard this a lot of this was as a result of hearing stuff on the Friday Rock Show. I mean, I was already big into Queen, but I think everything else was as a result of listening to the Friday Rock Show and being made aware of albums just coming out. But I remember hearing Heat Strokes, and I think there may have been a session they did which had Streamer and some other stuff. But my memory's a little bit hazy around there. But yeah, I bought this album when it came out. Yep, I had this. It must have been my middle brother was a big Tigers of Pantang fan. He had that on cassette, so he listened to this a lot. Storm of the Law. Yeah, I love the track on here, Dallas 1pm. And that sort of confirmed, I tend to have this, I was tended to be attracted to longer tracks. It's why I tended to like bands like Rush and sort of Rainbow, bands like that. And for those bands, you know, if I did buy anything by them in 1980, it would have been retrospectively. And then there's this album, which I've spoken a lot about before, Angel Witch album, came out in December. Yeah, I was chomping at the bit to buy this. I'd heard a lot of Angel Witch on the Friday Rock Show, and there was a session they did, and also tracks which aren't on here, like Extermination Day. Was it Extermination Day to Extermination Day? Anyway, one of the two. In fact, let's have a quick look at their discography. I wonder what... I'm trying to remember, because Extermination Date was a recording from a session, so I don't know whether it was on a B-side to a single or whether it was on... Was it on the Metal for Mothers one? No, Baphomet's on that. Not sure then. Oh yeah, I at least love this track. Yeah, sadly, let me get this right now. I think... So the good thing is I'm pretty sure I have a compilation CD with some of their tracks on it, because there was a tape I had of a Trespass session on Radio 1 on the Friday Rock Show, and I know it was definitely one of these days, Stormchild. I'm trying to remember the other two, but I don't remember them ever releasing an album out at that time. So years later, I think I tracked down this CD, like a double CD, which is a collection of their stuff, various sessions as well. So it's got sort of multiple recordings of the same tracks. There's like single versions and stuff they recorded for the Friday Rock Show. But I remember going on Spotify years later, or several years later after I bought the CD, and there is One of These Days on there, but it's a different recording by them. It's a later recording, so I should check back again and see if that ever filtered through onto Spotify. So let's have a look. Yeah, I mean, 1980 is an awesome album, awesome year for albums. So we got, the Pretenders' first album. I mean, this went on to be a real favourite of mine, but I've got to hold my hand up and say, look, I didn't buy this album when it came out. I didn't listen to the album when it came out. It wasn't until about, I think, 81, 82, where I got the cassette and I just played it to death. I have problems remembering when I bought Permanent Waves. That's why it wasn't on this list. I was playing a little bit of catch-up with Rush, and I was tending to buy the earlier albums. So it took until probably... I'm trying to remember when Exit Stage Left came out. So it wasn't around till around here where I started buying the albums as they came out, and didn't do it for very long either. And prior to that, I'd been retrospectively buying stuff. So that's why this isn't up here, and I didn't go through it first, because, again, another big... I mean, I just play this so much at the weekends, but I didn't buy it till probably the following year, I don't think. I mentioned that one already. This is a good album, but I didn't buy it till years later. It's got Underpass on it, I think. Is that the one? Yeah. So if you're not familiar with who John Fox is, he was the original singer in Ultravox, and actually recorded, was it 3 albums with them? Let's have a look at the timeline. Yeah, there you go. Before Midge joined them. So yeah, they were going around for quite a while, you can see. Yeah. No Place to Run. I never listened to that until years later, actually. It's not always, I mean, it's a good album, but it's not one of my favourite UFO albums. The one that I really love is this one, Wild Willing in the Incident, and then the early stuff. Sort of, the first Schenker era, if you like, because he has rejoined the band a couple of times, I think. Return of the Doriti Column, that was the one with the sandpaper cover. End of the Century. We do have a copy of that in the house, but I don't think I've ever owned it myself. Babel Strange, didn't buy. So some of this album, some of these from 1980, I went through like years later, and I've got this copy of what are they called now? Which I think what the name of the magazine is. Metal Hammer and Classic Rock did a joint decades thing where they did 70s, 80s, 90s, and they did like I don't know whether there's 10 or 20 albums each year. And sometime in the 2000s, I systematically went through 1980, 79, and I think it was 81, and maybe even been preceding that as well, 78, and tracked down a lot of stuff on CD. And at that point, as I've said on numerous occasions in the 2000s, second-hand like CDs that were still in really good condition were just dirt cheap. So yeah, I remember tracking down a lot of stuff retrospectively. So probably there's tons of stuff here like that. I did end up owning a copy of that, but again years later. I can remember seeing that in record stores and just continually looking at it, but in 1980 I had to be really selective with my buying. So yeah. Sheep Farming in Barnet. I did own a copy of this, but yeah, a number of years later. Does that have, what's that got on it? I had the LP, so it does have Neon Womb and Danced on it. Argy Bargy by Squeeze. And there's stuff like Little Fingers, Nobody's Hero, Stiff Little Fingers. First Psychedelic Furs album. Didn't really get into them until, 84. I saw them live around 85 or 86. And then prior to that, bought the albums retrospectively on cassette. And I got a few of them on CD as well. This is a classic, but I didn't buy it until after I bought the following album. So I didn't buy it when it came out, but yeah. And I think ultimately one of my brothers bought a copy of this as well, but a lot later. I think there was a copy of it on vinyl in the house. This is another one we had a copy of, but I just couldn't remember when we bought it. We had a few Van Halen albums between us, sort of, you know, like I can remember one of us buying the first album, and then one of my other brothers buying this album, and then someone else buying the second album. And then I bought the fourth album. So it wasn't really until about the fourth album that I sort of got in step. Yeah, Fair Warning I bought when it came out, but a lot of their other stuff was bought retrospectively. And Women and Children First, I just don't remember if one of us bought it in 1980 or not. So again, I sort of left it off the sort of, you know, zero, day zero list. I remember this being really big, Duke by Genesis, but I never heard it till years later. Does this have Mama on it? No. Oh, that's it. I was trying to think because there's always like one big track on. If I don't recognise, if I don't know a Genesis album very well, I can normally, when I play it through, I normally recognise like one of the tracks because, you know, they were doing quite well at this point in terms of singles. And yeah, it was Turn It On Again. That's what I'm trying to think of. So, did Abacab have Mama on it? No. Not sure then. Okay. Anyway, let's not go off down too much of a side quest here. I just remember always seeing this in the record stores. Again, some of these stick in my mind, not because I necessarily some of the albums here, which I didn't listen to, still stick in my mind because I remember seeing them in the record store window, or in WH Smith, or in I think Boots at that point was selling records, the chemist, and certainly Woolworths were selling music. There's Progressions of Power, which you already mentioned. Yeah, this was Joe Perry's first of 3 studio albums, and there was one track which was on a compilation which we had in the house, but I just don't remember the name of the track. It was like a double album. I think I've got it somewhere actually on vinyl, but I can't really reach over to dig it out. I remember Air Supply being really big around that time. So yeah, 1980 is super interesting because you've got a point when a lot of Nwuba bands who had their roots in terms of, that being first put together, first formed, I think is the word I'm trying to look for there, when they were first formed, was in the 70s. And there's that line in the Saxon song, Denim and Leather, like, where were you in 79 when the dam began to burst? So there were a few bands had stuff out in 79, Saxon being one of them. But a lot of the, the first albums or the significant albums by Nwuba bands came out in 1980, and bands that predate Nwuba but were able to get associated with it because of music like, Judas Priest. Also, got a nice bump, and British Steel did, super well at the time. But we got the debut Iron Maiden album, and I think I mentioned this before in my episode on getting into Iron Maiden. I had quite a number of the singles around the time of the second album, but I didn't buy this when it came out, I don't think. So again, that's why it's not up here on my early listens. 17 Seconds by The Cure, which is the second album. Love this album, but I didn't properly start listening to The Cure, buying Cure albums till 81. Maybe, actually, may have been let me just think about that. Actually, I might be wrong there. May have been... Not that one. No, it was a bit later. The Top, 84, I bought when it came out. I did like them, but I just didn't buy anything by them. Up until 84, I was still really interested in the new wave of British heavy metal. That's when it sort of went off the boil for me a little bit. 83 into 84, I think, as I sort of started to switch more to just general guitar bass bands, really. Oh, this famous Golden Years EP. Yeah. I had a friend who had this. I think I might have it as an adjunct to like a CD or something like that I bought years later. But I think aren't most of the tracks, or a lot of the tracks, so same tour as the No Sleep Till Hammersmith, which came out after, and it's got Leaving Here, Stone Dead Forever, Dead Men Tell No Tales. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so the tracks on it are Overkill, Bomber, and then Leaving Here single, in terms of, they're live versions of those tracks, but that's where they came from originally. And yeah, I think I might have mentioned this before. I remember walking by W.H. Smith in the late 70s and just being in awe of the Bomber poster. It looks so cool. And then sometime, it must have been 1980, because I remember still being at school, buying Overkill, I think it was, which had come out in 79, and then buying Ace of Spades when it came out. But yeah, the Golden Years EP, had a friend who had this. And that was the big thing for them because it was their first live recording. There was stuff that came out, after the fact, which had early recordings, but yeah, that was the first sort of official one. I don't think I ever owned that. What were they up to by then? 13th album, wow. Yeah, this is a cool album. It's got that Warm Leatherette track. Originally, I was actually listening to it the other day because it came up. I was watching a YouTube video about the Korg 700S, something like that, synth, and on the episode they were talking about Warm Leatherette, the original one by what would the name of the band be? The Normal. So it's there's a lot of covers on here. There's a really good cover of Private Life and stuff like that. So yeah, but this trilogy of albums. So you've got Warm Leatherette, Night Clubbing, and is it Living My Life? So they were all recorded at Compass Point, and I think they all feature my favourite rhythm section still. So Sly Dunbar was Sly and Robbie. I think that's the case on all three albums, isn't it? I know I did an episode about the trilogy. I should know better, but Robbie Shakespeare, Sly Dunbar. Also, we're in Black Uhuru, but yeah, it's well worth going down a Compass Point rabbit hole. Actually, there's lots of interesting thing in terms of the people that were hanging around there, around Compass Point, and formed this almost like a studio band. Unmasked by Kiss. I remember when this came out, because it had the track Is That You on it, and I do remember She Agreed had a cover of, where's it gone? Do You Love Me? Yeah, so I was sort of aware of a connection there in the tracks. What are they up to by now? Second Human League. So last album, yeah, so that was before they sort of fragmented. And didn't Martin Ware end up in Heaven 17? Yeah. Yeah, but I came to listen to a lot of Human League a lot later, sometime after Dare, a few years after Dare. And then I went back and listened to, what was their early stuff? What were they called back then? They had a slightly different name, didn't they? Oh yeah, see, there's another reference to a Korg 700S. What were they called? The Future. That was it, yeah, The Future. Yeah, I have that album. Yeah, I probably bought it around then. So I went on a bit of a sort of deep dive sometime in the 2000s for some really early Human League stuff. Third album, I didn't buy that until the 2000s. There's a lot of, wasn't really till about 81 when I was in the sixth form for a year. But Peter Gabriel, I remember, was a popular artist to get played in the sixth form common room, along with Rush and Blue Oyster Cult. Bad Reputation. Oh yeah, this one, I have this, but I didn't buy it till years later. I'm a Rebel by Accept, second album. Yeah, it took me quite a while to track that down. years later. I got into Accept around about the time of Breaker. I saw them on tour with Judas Priest when Judas Priest was supporting Point of Entry, and I thought they were awesome. So I went out and bought got it on import, bought Breaker, and then the following few albums. Demolition by Girls' School, that's a classic. But yeah, it took me a few years to buy that, actually. I think again it's just limited funds. It's called Sorcerer Rectus. What, that has Black Blade on it, doesn't it? Yeah, An Unknown Tongue. Oh, Steve Hackett from Genesis from 71 to 77. That was his 4th album. I did ultimately end up owning this Tomcatting by Blackfoot, but yeah, they'd done quite a few albums prior to that, and I bought Marauder when it came out, and then bought Tomcatting and Strikes. So you didn't get into them until about 81. Yeah, it's a classic, but I didn't own it until probably early to mid 80s. And that was a result of, I was aware of where's it gone? Vienna. That was a huge hit. In 81 as their 3rd single. So I heard that, thought it was really cool. But musically, they weren't really my cup of tea at the time. And then I was had a roller disco in sometime in the, I don't know, around 81, 82. I can't remember now. A bit of a cloudy evening, and they played All Stood Still. They played that, and they played Whip It by Devo, and they were announcing the tracks. And then as a result of that, I went out and bought Vienna because I really loved the guitar solo on All Stood Still, and then I really liked Whip It as well. So I remember buying whatever album that's off of as well a little bit later. Oh, I forgot this came out Head On. Yeah, I didn't really start listening to Samson still until Shock Tactics, which was the last album with Bruce Dickinson on, 81. Closer by Joy Division, didn't really get into them until a little bit later in the 80s, I would say. Probably, not until after they'd disbanded and went on to become, remaining members went on to become New Order. So Back in Black by AC/DC. Yeah, I didn't mark this up because it's funny, they played it a lot on the Friday Rock Show, but I didn't buy it until several years later. There was a house that my parents used to look after during the summer holidays. And one year they'd gone up there with my brothers, and this was a lot later. This was, 81, 82 maybe. And they went and stayed there, and then I looked after like our house at the time when I was sort of still living at home. And one of the kids up there, I think it was the son of the owners of the house, used to be a big AC/DC fan. So we ended up listening to all these like AC/DC cassettes, Back in Black, and all the earlier stuff as well, and then went on to buy it. But at that time, the only album I was really familiar with would have been something like Highway to Hell, or one of the previous albums, Let There Be Rock, something like that. Because I might have told this story, but I used to walk back from a friend's house on a Sunday morning, I used to go down and see them on Sunday morning and go and listen to music. And on the way back, I used to walk past his house just before you got onto the Ashdown Forest, and there'd always be AC/DC blaring out of the live album. And so I was aware of Bon Scott era, and I suppose was more interested in that era. So I think the first albums that got bought AC/DC wise would have been Bon Scott albums, and then it was later that we got hold of a couple of ones with later AC/DC. I'm trying to think of the name of the guy now, in case not my name. Brian Johnson. That's it. Dear me. Oh, there's Wildcat. I think the following year they actually released 2 albums, from what I remember. Black Hero. What were they up to by then? 3rd album. So I didn't get into them a little bit later. Kaleidoscope. Yeah, I didn't buy that till a lot later. But that's got some cool stuff on it. That's Happy House on it, and what is it? Christine. Yeah. Was that the first one with... Yeah, that would have been the first one with Budgie and John McGeoch, who I did a episode in the past, a video on. Yeah, one of my favourite guitarists. Glory Road by Gillan. I remember that coming out. The only track we were really me and brothers were aware of at the time by Gillan was the stuff that got played in the charts, because after Glory Road came out, he started to have some singles. The band started to have some single success, and we used to really like Bernie Tormé, the guitarist. We thought he was awesome. I had this sort of slightly punky... It's almost like punk meets Randy Rhoads, I always felt, just for some reason. And so we really liked Gillan because of Bernie Tormé playing in the band. And I remember the track, is it Running Whiteface City Boy, which I think, isn't that from... Is that from... Glory Road? Yeah, that's it. That was on some compilation album that we owned. Yeah, or Mr. Hang on, what am I doing? So that's on Mr. Getting muddled up here again. Let me look at that again. Yeah, that's right, because it had this extra for Gillan fans only thing as well. And I remember listening to the Friday Rock Show and Tommy Vance talking about that at the time, about getting it early so you could get the limited edition free LP. I forgot to mention Head On's got Vice Versa on it as well, which wasn't that on didn't they feature in, it's like some band at the start of some horror film playing at a gig. I'm trying to remember the name of the horror film, and they were playing Vice Versa. I'm trying to, was it the Incubus? So yeah, anyway, I have a distant memory. Right, Panorama by Cars. I wasn't too good at keeping up, even as much as I loved the would it be the debut album, which came out in '78, and when I did finally buy it sometime in, I don't know, early 80s maybe, definitely not 1980, I just played it to death. And that's right, I remember in sort of 85, it was one of my favourite albums to listen to when I was driving to gigs in Brighton. Going down and coming back to gigs. And it's funny, isn't it, when you go, I think the drive down, you know, it's not quite as long as a full album. So there was always this thing where I'd remember, like, you know, driving, the first side of the album often reminds me of driving down to the gig, and then the second side reminds me of driving back. Drama by Yes. Now, that had Trevor Horn on it. I actually thought this is a pretty good album. I thought they fitted in really well myself to the sound. I didn't own it till years later, or listen to it until years later, but I can remember hearing Into the Lens. Signing Off, I remember that. Several friends had that album. I wasn't really a big UB40 fan at the time, even though I liked reggae. Didn't really like UB40 that much. This is a cool album. Yeah, a friend of mine had that, and I didn't buy it till a little bit later. But yeah, excellent album. What's that track on it? Lost Horizons. That got played on the Friday Rock Show a lot, and that again cemented my love of the longer tracks. Like, I remember that track I was obsessed by, and Dallas 1PM. I should do I have to create myself a playlist actually on Spotify over the weekend, when I'm recording this thing of like favourite long tracks from 1980. And that would definitely be on there. Fresh Fruit for Rotting Vegetables. Another album I just heard because I had friends into this, and I didn't buy it until somewhere in the early to mid 80s, I don't think. Blizzard of Oz. Didn't own that until a little bit later. I did own one of the early singles, but I can't remember which one it was. I got like a 12-inch single on there. Is it I Don't Know? Anyway. That's a good album. Scary Monsters, Super Creeps. First album after the Berlin trilogy. I didn't buy it till years later, but I do remember when did that come out? September. Yeah, maybe it was the album before that. Oh no, that's right, Lodger was the one I remember from school. Someone had a copy of the Lodger. Yeah. This is one of my favourite albums. Didn't really listen to it until about 81, 82. But yeah, great tracks on here. Was it the last Skids album with Stuart Adamson on it, I believe. There's also a really interesting recording. I think it might still be on Spotify. There's a John Peel session of the Skids, but with John McGeoch playing guitar, because Stuart Adamson got sick or something happened and couldn't play the session, so John McGeoch stepped in. Well, it's, pretty interesting if you can track it down. But cool album. It's got in terms of the single, I mean, there's Circus Games on there, which was a big single. But it's the deeper tracks that I really like Arena, stuff like that. But, yeah. The other thing is the listing on Spotify. I think the order's different than how it was released in the UK for some reason, because I actually got the UK release listing and reorganised it on Spotify and created my own playlist for a while, just so I could listen back to it in its original form. Because I used to listen to this on my Walkman Like I say, a bit later in the 80s, when I was walking backwards and forwards to meet up a friend at the pub, which was quite a few miles away. And I can remember just walking down the hill afterwards and walking up, listening to this album. Fortunately, it was downhill on the way home. White Spirit, didn't that have... That's funny. Janet Gers in it, yeah. Went on to be an Iron Maiden. Beating the Odds, Molly Hatchet. I always remember these album covers. I had no idea at the time that Molly Hatchet were like a southern rock band, just because the album covers didn't. I thought they were like some sword and sorcery band, you know, a bit like a sort of, I don't know. Not power metal wasn't a thing there, but yeah, I had no idea that they were like a southern rock band. That's a really good album, Curtis Blower debut album. If you want to sort of listen to really early, like old school hip hop, yeah, real sort of early stuff. Yeah, I listened to it for the first time a couple of years ago and I was really impressed. There's Niente Mondata, which we'd seen in that, popular albums from. So this also called, I believe, the White Album, which was originally available through mail order. I didn't own until a few years later, like one of the reprintings. I think the reprinting I owned was Behold the Beginning, something like that. And then I did end up owning a copy of it on CD when it was later re-released with, I think, some extra tracks on it. Chinatown, I didn't own that when it came out. It was the first album of how long was the run? Was he Snowy White was in for Chinatown, Renegade, but not Thunderous. So yeah, he did like a 2-album run. I actually quite enjoyed both of those albums, and I do like Chinatown, but I didn't buy it when it came out. Yeah, whenever I think of both Thin Lizzy and The Cure, I always just remember, reminds me of someone I knew from work. The first place I worked at for a number of years, from around like 81 through to, what would have been, 93. Yeah, I was there for about 12 years. And when I was there, one of the technicians who'd been there for quite a while, senior tech, he used to live over in a place called Crawley, and the place I worked was down in a place called Felbridge, the other side of a town in Sussex called East Grinstead. And I used to have to catch the bus sometimes in the evenings to go over there to go to college, and once a week, but not very often, because I used to get a lift off someone else generally. But sometimes, a person wouldn't go to college, or they were sick, or whatever. And so, if he saw me standing by the roadside, he'd stop and pick me up, and we used to listen to Thin Lizzy and The Cure on the drive over to Crawley. So that was really cool. So I always think of that. And this big stack of like Thin Lizzy cassettes in his car, and listen to. I got introduced to a lot of albums I didn't know by them, so that was really cool. I was trying to think what was the first album by them that I bought when it actually came out, and it probably would have been the following album, Renegade. Everything else I saw was bought retrospectively. Invitation by Hawkwind. I remember seeing the cover to that. I didn't buy it at the time. Boy by U2. Debut album came out then. And the only memory I have of U2 back then is around 81 when I started work. The lab I worked in all the labs had like a prep person, sort of someone that used to do all the leaching and stuff, because we were using antibiotics. After you'd done the day's work, everything had to be cleaned with hydrochloric. No, sorry, it's not right. Sodium hydroxide, alkali, and then neutralised. And there was a lot of stuff. So each of the lab actually employed somebody to do that full time, because all the labs, I was working in the prep lab at that point, doing it for production, and then there was an R&D lab, and there was a quality control lab, which I wasn't working at that time, but worked in later. And all of the labs had somebody whose job, literally day in day out, was to load up the autoclaves for sterilisation and do all the cleaning of all the glassware and all the other stuff, so that it would be done properly, and it had to all be tested to make sure it still the pH hadn't changed, so it would be treated with alkali, and then it would be neutralised and flushed, and that just went on day in day out. And the reason why I'm talking about this is I remember her son was big into U2, and she just kept on about this band called U2 because he was obsessed by them. But that wasn't until 81 that I became aware of them. And then a bit later, around, I don't know, 83, 84 maybe, I remember someone I worked with when I moved to immunology. We were in a technical production department where we'd create all these sort of specialised kits that had very short runs and do protein purification and all sorts of stuff like that. It's a really interesting job, actually. And all sorts of filtration stuff. He'd said to me, "Oh, have you ever checked out U2?" And I said, "No." He said, "Oh, you should check them out, the War album and the live album. I think you'd really like." He was a Led Zeppelin fan, but really latched onto U2. So he said, "Yeah, there's this whole wave of new, like, guitar-based bands that are starting to get big now, like U2 and Big Country. Big Country would have been." And I was already sort of aware of the Skids, but hadn't checked out Big Country and didn't necessarily realise the connection there. Like Stuart Adamson had been in both bands. So I ended up going down a sort of U2 Big Country rabbit hole sometime in like 83, 84. All Shook Up by Cheap Trick, 5th album. Ace of Spades came out that year. And that one I'm sure of because, I can't hold up my hand and say I definitely bought that when it came out. And I didn't buy it, one of my brothers bought it, so I'm really unsure of when that was bought, whether it was bought that year. So I'm more just still probably listening to Overkill quite a bit, because I know we had Overkill and On Parole in the house, and someone did buy Ace of Spades, and I bought the live album when it came out, No Sleep Till Hammersmith. Yeah, we had a copy of this in the house. My dad owned this, QE2. Yeah, I remember a friend having that album. I didn't get into Killing Joke until quite a bit later, until around the time of Revelations, I think. Is that the album with Empire Song on it? Yeah, whatever album's got Empire Song on it, which I think is Revelations. And then started buying stuff going forward. I went to see Killing Joke around the time of Night Time. So that would have been, 85, I think? So I'm looking forward to getting to the 85 episode when we do it, because I'll have lots to talk about for that year, because I was going to lots of live gigs. From about late 84 to 87, I was seeing a lot of bands live, so it's going to be interesting how album releases line up with live gigs. This is a really cool album, but I didn't listen to it till a lot later. This is really cool, the Black Album, but I listened to it a lot later. And when I did buy it, I bought the single disc version, single vinyl version. But years later, I did buy the double one. It's a strange album because it's got so you got side 1, side 2, side 3. All of side 3 is Curtain Call, and then side 4 is a live album. So I owned a copy of this which just had this, and then I bought a 12-inch single which had White Rabbit on it and Curtain Call. But then years later, when I was doing a bit of a sort of getting back into vinyl, supporting local record stores, I bought a reissued version of this album, not with this cover on it actually. And yeah, so I have that now, so I don't like the double. But the double one that I got is really strange because it's the reissue on vinyl is actually 2 separate album sleeves that were actually just shrink wrapped together, which I didn't expect. I went to undo it thinking, oh, it will fold out, and it didn't. It was actually two separate albums, which was interesting. I don't know if I've ever seen that before. Super Trooper, my dad owned a copy of this. I used to listen to this a lot because friends owned it, but I didn't learn it till years later. This is a really cool album, but sadly I never really got into Japan until after they packed up, because I owned there's a compilation album, I think it's called Assemblage, which I bought. I think it came out after they'd packed up, and then I went through and sort of bought all of their stuff retrospectively. Yeah. This is a classic, Kings of the World Frontier. I had so many friends that were into this album, so it's one that I didn't really bother buying. I just used to hear it all the time. This is a cool album, so yeah, it's got Midge Ure on it, hasn't it? A few other people, Steve Strange, Midge Ure, John McGeoch played on it, Billy Currie, Dave Formula, Rusty Egan, sort of what would you call it? Synth pop supergroup. I don't know if that's the right term. Yeah. So yeah, lots of connections, I suppose, between this band and the new romantic movement as well. High Infidelity by REO Speedwagon. I remember that because what track was it? Oh, Keep On Loving You was a big hit in the charts. Didn't own the album, but it was another one that I think used to crop up in the sixth form common room. So Blondie were on Auto American by that time, and I didn't really own anything by the band until a few years later, and I was more interested in around the time of Parallel Lines, really, that sort of period. There's Strong Arm of the Law, which I already mentioned, and then getting to here we've got Flash Gordon's Soundtrack by Queen, which I actually went to see at the cinema, but didn't buy the album until a few years later. Ark of the Diver by Steve Winwood. I think that did pretty well at the time. I remember it being, seeing it a lot in the charts. Yeah. And then we got odd stuff here and there. I remember the Vardis album. Empire Strikes Back soundtrack. It'll be interesting when we get to the albums from, the films from that year as well. So quick look at 1980 heavy metal stuff, in case anything I forgot. There's loads of stuff I just remember seeing in the like salivating over at the record store, but just couldn't afford to buy. So you had Budgie Power Supply. There was where did I see it? Oh, it's gone now. I mean, I did already mention Demolition. A few other ones that year as well, which I did buy retrospectively. I did have Shaking Street track on some compilation album. The track Solid as a Rock. I think most of these probably I've already highlighted because they as we went through the previous list, they did come up. But yeah, as I pointed out as we went through them, quite a lot of them bought a little bit later. I do remember this album, and I didn't really listen to it until the Spotify era. I had the lead track I had to listen to the on the radio. Well, no, I thought it was a lead track. Sorry, second track on the album. Has this sort of really interesting. White Knuckles is a sort of, I would say, a Gary Moore-esque version of what's the Van Halen tapping one? It's not tapping, but it's in that sort of same style. So it's an intro into another track, basically. So yeah. Okay, albums. Highest grossing films in the US. Empire Strikes Back, Kramer vs. Kramer, The Jerk, Airplane, Smoking the Bandit 2, Coal Miner's Daughter, Private Benjamin, The Blues Brothers, Electric Horseman, The Shining. So of this list, quite a number of them, I would say, I've probably seen on video in the early 80s, or sometime around then, whenever we got a video recorder in the house, video player. But in terms of stuff that I saw at the movie, saw at the cinema, Empire Strikes Back definitely. But that's probably about it, I think. Everything else I would have seen after that. I can't remember if I ever saw Smoking the Bandit at the cinema. That's the trouble. And then there's a bit of a better list so we can sort of see as it comes out. So yeah, I definitely saw this at the cinema. Star Trek motion picture. And a lot of this I saw later. Things like The Fog, several years later. I wasn't old enough to see it at the cinema at this point anyway. So, but definitely saw The Empire Strikes Back. I remember Dressed to Kill coming out, and I didn't see that till years later. Exterminator, that's another horror one I remember from the... as well, what did they class it as? Oh, vigilante action film, sorry, my mistake. Yeah, I do remember that though. There's Flash Gordon. We've got Stir Crazy. Yeah, there's so many of these that were popular, when home video became a thing, like VHS, and video stores sort of opened up a lot in the UK in the early to mid 80s. Yeah, that turned up. Friday the 13th. Did that get a whole... I remember there was a whole video nasty thing in the UK as well, like 1984, somewhere around there, maybe, when that kicked off. So, yeah. No doubt we'll talk about that when we get to talk about stuff from 1984. I suspect it will come up. Okay, well, thanks once again for watching. Bye for now, and I will catch you in a future episode.